Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. Tonight we'll be discussing a film that has influenced everyone from Alfred Hitchcock to Martin Scorsese, from William Castle to Francis Ford Coppola. It's French director Henri-Georges Clouzot's 1955 masterpiece, Les Diaboliques.
Attention. Écoutez. Écoutez.
Ce sont des monstres. Dieu n'aime pas les monstres.
Oh, j'ai la tête qui éclate, moi. Je vis une histoire de fou.
Ce n'est pas une histoire de fou, c'est une histoire diabolique.
Qui est là?
Allô, qui est là? Répondez, nom de Dieu.
Une baignoire diabolique. Un costume d'homme diabolique. Une malle en osier diabolique. Une piscine Qu'est-ce que c'est?
Tonight we'll be discussing this French masterwork of suspense and terror, and we've assembled an incredible panel to chat about it with me. Let's bring everybody in. And let's say hello to Don Babst.
Hello, good to see everybody.
Cullen Wade.
If you reveal the ending of this film to anyone who hasn't seen it, Christina will haunt you.
Doug Long.
Good evening.
Melissa Hannon.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
And Mark Easted.
Hey, fellow horror fiends.
And tonight we're going to be discussing 1955's Les Diaboliques, or Diabolique as it was also known, coming out from 1955, celebrating its 70th anniversary. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome. And we're just going to start things off by just saying this is one of those films that you don't want to reveal the ending. However, we're going to be revealing the ending. So spoilers, everybody. If you haven't seen the movie, go check it out pronto and then come right back and we'll join our conversation in progress. Don, I'm going to start things off with you because you contributed the essay for the book Horror 101. And look, there it is, everybody. And I wanted to see if you would oblige us with the synopsis for this film, but also then tell us how you came to the film for the first time.
Happily. So the synopsis that I wrote for the book, for my essay in the book, is the headmaster of an all-boys boarding school beats his frail wife and has an affair with one of the teachers under her nose to boot. When he starts abusing the mistress, the two women plot and execute his murder. Then his body goes missing.
That's lovely. That's our synopsis. And how did you come to this film for the first time?
I really can't remember the very first time. It's one of these things that's always been with me. I feel like it's been with me forever. I lived in France for a couple of years, and even before I went to France, I know that I had already seen it. I think it was probably because I heard about its relationship to Psycho, and that was probably what first drew me to it. But Simone Signoret as well, an actress that I had always followed and admired, so it's just kind of been in my life, lurking like this frothy pool outside the window, like always inviting me back into its depths, and it always pays off every time you go back. It's one of those movies you watch it and you finish it, and then like a couple days later, if it's on the TV, I'll just be sitting there and I can't turn my eyes off of it. Like like any Kubrick film or certain films where you just can't get away from the thing.
Cullen, how about you?
So I first watched this film at some point in my early 20s. I remember the horrific apartment I was living in when I watched it, when I did a lot of my formative horror watching. Like Don said, it stuck with me a lot. Every time I would see a film in subsequent years that ripped it off, I would be like, Diabolique! I'd be like the Leonardo meme, pointing at the TV. But I revisited it very recently because of a book that I wrote on the subject of swimming pools in horror films. It's called Splasher Flicks. It's coming out at some point in the coming year from McFarland. And I think of Diabolique as part of the holy trinity of swimming pool horror films, along with Cat People and Sunset Boulevard. So when I saw this one pop up, I was like, that is good for me and also for my brand. So I want to talk about it.
Well, I was glad you had, and you already pimped your book. I was definitely going to make sure that we talked about that, because I'm very excited to hear more about your swimming pool odyssey. Let's dive down to Doug. When did you come across this film?
Only in the past couple decades. I don't know when it was, but I teach a class on the films of Alfred Hitchcock, and it certainly comes up quite a bit, especially when he was making Vertigo, and also later Psycho. And so I saw it in that context. I also knew that Hitchcock was very fond of it and was very aware of some of the reviews that came out around it that mentioned that Clouzot out Hitchcock. So he certainly wanted to pay attention to that.
And Melissa.
I saw this, I'm trying to think, I think it was in my late teens. I kind of went through a Hitchcock phase, and I was told this was the Hitchcock film that Hitchcock didn't direct, and it immediately kind of, brought that to my attention. So I checked that out, and it turns out my dad was also a big fan of this film, and so we had that kind of in common with these films. And I loved it, and it's one that I've revisited many times over the years. I love the twist, and I love the setting. Just everything is just perfect.
Thank you. And Melissa, this is your first time on the show, so thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but it was probably early to mid 90s, probably a little bit before the remake came out. Probably heard about it through Hitchcock, or like, oh, here are some of the classic ones you should see. And so I saw it, and it definitely, it's one that even if you don't remember all the details, there are certain shots that just stick in your brain. Like obviously coming out of the bathtub and the white eyes and stuff, like you don't forget it. And you obviously don't forget the first time you see the twist. So it's a fun movie to watch with others. And then recently I host a horror movie meetup, and we were discussing, we did trivia, and we were talking about Psycho, and some of the connections between the two came up. So when I saw it on your list, it reminded me again. I was like, oh yeah, I would like to talk about this one.
We have kind of already talked about some of the Hitchcockian elements, but that's kind of a flavor. And I'd like to kind of maybe dig into what those elements are. I mean, what we identify as Hitchcockian, and then what is it about this film that brings those elements up?
Well, I would say certainly the suspense about halfway through, when we realize that Michelle may not really be dead. And in Hitchcock, it's much more about suspense than about gore. And here, we got all these little clues along the way. Wait, a boy said he saw him? His suit came back. I think that certainly could be matched to some of the style of Hitchcock.
I think the whole story itself, that kind of twisted relationships, kind of psychosexual stuff going on, and the mistress, like she is a Hitchcock woman. The short blonde hair, kind of that severe look, like so much of it felt like Hitchcock. I would say even weirdly, the only music in this movie is the opening credits. And as soon as I heard it, though, I was like, oh, man, this sounds like a Hitchcock movie. So kind of like that feeling to me is like, you can feel the connections.
Yeah. I think there are two things that jump out at me. The idea of, well, Hitchcock's Rope, I think, is a great analog for this, because on the one hand, there's the idea that you have witnessed somebody commit murder and do a wrong, however justified in this particular film it is. You've seen like the wrongdoer do their wrong thing, and then you spend the rest of the movie hoping they don't get caught. Hitchcock talked about that with respect to Marnie, how using the language of cinema, you can make the audience sympathize with somebody even if they are a wrongdoer and they're doing a crime, and make you hope that they get away with it. And the other thing, of course, is the queer aspect to it, which I hope we'll get into because it's kind of central to my analysis of the film and the book. The kind of the same-sex couple committing murder together as sort of a symbolic consummation of a queer relationship, just like Rope.
Some other elements that feel Hitchcockian.
I had just other connections between the two movies. One is, now this may be apocryphal, but supposedly Clouzot bought the rights to the novel literally hours before Hitchcock. So Hitchcock was, and then later the guys who wrote that book wrote another book which Hitchcock optioned and became Vertigo. So he went back to that well that he didn't get that first time. So I thought that was kind of cool. And it just said, after he had made like North by Northwest and everything, and he kind of done all these big budget, he was thinking about like, how are all these black and white B movies like doing so well at the box office? And like, what would happen if people saw one of these, but it was actually well made? And so he wanted to do it. And then after this came out, he's like, well, now, and everyone's comparing it to me. I really want to do it. They almost kind of like drove each other, so that this kind of inspired him to go forward with Psycho.
With your first point, Mark, after Hitchcock did not get the She Who Was No More book, according to one of Hitchcock's biographers, Boileau and Narcejac wrote the other one, The Living and the Dead, hoping that Hitchcock would buy it and make a movie of their book.
Which he did, and turned into Vertigo.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of people talk about the relationship of this to Psycho, I'm not really sure how much Clouzot thought about Hitchcock in the making of the film. I haven't read a lot about that specifically. It's usually the other way that I've heard it talked about.
Right.
Having said that, Gaslight was almost 10 years or around 10 years before this. And like, this is a prime example of gaslighting in a film, because the main character is gaslit by the other two characters throughout the whole story, and that's what it all hinges upon, really. So we can't help think that there must have been some influence there. But having said that, the source material, the book, there's a different killer and a different relationship. So we don't have the mistress and the wife going in on it together. Instead,
it's a salesman and his wife. It is a very kind of like your normal, what you would expect a thriller to be, someone conspiring to kill the wife.
Yeah. And the book, it takes, it has a lot of the same elements, other than that big shift. But to Colin's point, the queer aspect of it is missing from the book entirely. And that's one of the things that makes the film so thrilling. I mean, whether you're queer as I am or not, I think that adds an additional twist to the whole proceedings, which was particularly tittillating at that time in the 50s for especially for North American audiences, I would say, who kind of, I don't know if flocked to art house cinemas is quite the right word, but there was like a lot of buzz about this. Oh, there's this film that's so it's this naughty French film, where you're going to see all these terrible things and people behaving really badly. And then there's going to be the shocking ending. Before we had Psycho, before we had an ending quite as shocking as that. There's probably some other examples we could cite, but this one really kind of put that on the radar for a lot of people.
To your point, I mean, we have the alterations made from the original novel, such as incorporating Vera Clouzout, who plays Christina, incorporating her actual heart condition into the plot. Like, it becomes integral to the plot. It's like the scheme is that we will frighten her so badly that she dies. And that's something that, you know, again, I wasn't familiar with the source novel before seeing the film, but going and reading more about it, to find out how much of it is actually different than the original source material, and that he's incorporated so much of it. And this was only Vera Clouzout's second film, and she's basically asked to carry the thing after having a small part in Wages of Fear, which is the film he'd made prior. I know that there has been a lot written and said about Vera Clouzout's shortcomings as an actress, because she wasn't an actor. She was somebody who her husband had basically brought in, and he had the ego thinking that he could make anybody an actor. He had that feeling about himself as a director. But I think, and I mean, I'd love to have the discussion, but I think she's really terrific in this film. I think she does bring a lot of nuance to it. And I think the fact that she's paired opposite two professional actors in the form of Simone Signoret and Paul Meurisse, it really actually works. They feel like the schemers, and she feels like the innocent.
I would say she gives the least convincing death scene of anybody in any movie. Other than that, though, I think she's pretty convincing in terms of getting progressively more paranoid.
I really like that she has a childlike kind of performance, especially, you know, compared to her character, compared to Nicole. Nicole is very, like Mark said, very stern. She's very, you know, matter of fact. She kind of knows what she wants in life. And, you know, I like that she is just much more innocent and childlike. And, you know, you really feel for her because you feel how fragile and vulnerable she is. And she really carries that part well. I actually didn't know until, I'm going to date myself here. But I didn't know that she was married to the director for years, because I watched this before Google and IMDb. So, you know, we didn't look things up back then. We just had to find things out later. So I actually didn't know any of that. And once I found out, it didn't take anything away, for sure.
No, that's true. That's true.
Probably what was her actual real hesitancy and bumbling, potentially as a kind of novice actor, worked for the part. That, you know, she may have been sort of playing herself, but it worked because that's how the character was. She died from that heart condition at a fairly young age, and so there was always some, you know, conspiracy theory speculations compared to the plot of the movie,
which Don talks about in his essay, talking about the you know, art imitating life, imitating art.
I think her performance is just perfect. If there's any kind of awkwardness or anything like that, it just is built into the character, because the character herself is not worldly, not able to deal with these people around her and navigating them and having her own agency. So it if she seems terrified all the time, you know, maybe some of it was being terrified of being on the set, and maybe that just read on camera. I think she dies pretty well at the end.
I was just going to say, I'm going to defend her death scene.
I don't know. It may not be realistic necessarily, but it certainly evokes the, you know, as I get older, I feel more tension in my chest, you know, and things like that. Like I don't have an advanced heart condition, but I take blood pressure meds, you know, and I just imagine myself going through what she's going through, and responding to the situation like that, and just the you know, having that last gasp.
Well, having just revisited Wages of Fear prior to this, her character is so different in that film. It's a very dynamic and sexual and free and emotional. And then to see her doing this, it's like, no, this is somebody who is acting. Like, this is a performance. And whether it's coached along, I know that Simone Signoret had said that a lot of her best takes did not get used because they needed to use Vera Clouzout's better takes because it took a while to get there. So I can understand the frustration in that regard, being a seasoned professional. But I think she's terrific, especially when you see those films side by side. It's clear that she has talent and has a real presence. Colin?
Yeah, I've never seen anybody die of a heart attack, so I don't know what it's supposed to look like, but I thought she
some of the other performances, Simone Signoret, for example.
I thought she was perfectly cast. You know, it didn't feel like a performance that she was like a worldly woman who knew what she wanted and how to get it, and, you know, spoke her mind. And I'm not going to try and butcher his name in the French, but the guy playing Michel, it was such a douche. And for you to feel that about a character means the performance has to be good. The performance wasn't douchey. The character was. And I do agree that a lot of the smaller, like the employees at the school and stuff, were there from a little bit of comedic effect. And I do wonder if the inspector was ever a part of the inspiration for Columbo.
He absolutely
very Columbo
was.
Before Columbo. So
he absolutely was.
Okay.
Right down the line.
Okay. Because this feels like Columbo. So,
and that's that actor playing the inspector is Charles Vanel, who is also in Wages of Fear. And again, watching those performances side by side, he's again very vibrant and powerful in Wages of Fear, and here he is that Columbo kind of repeating questions and very kind of introspective, chewing on his cigar, etc. But it's a wonderful turn there. But not to get away from Simone Signoret. Don, I saw you rolling your eyes in ecstasy.
So Signoret is, especially in this film, I think this is her quintessential performance. Like she won an Oscar, I believe.
Yeah, Room at the Top.
Yeah. But this film, it's not just the performance, but it's also, she just kind of epitomizes French sang-froid and elegance, especially if you understand the French, just the way that she speaks, the way she uses language in this playful yet kind of jabby way. She's constantly in power over everyone around her, or so it appears. And at the same time, everyone kind of tolerates her. Everyone at the school knows that this woman is having an affair with the head of the school, and yet they just take all of her orders and nobody calls her out on anything. Because how could you, when she walks in like looking like that? It's like smoking a cigarette like that and wearing those clothes. And she just exudes confidence and power. And I think that was also part of the appeal for North American audiences, in that women didn't look like this. Women weren't supposed to smoke or drink whiskey at this time in culture in the 1950s. And she's drinking Johnny Walker, and she has a cigarette in just about every scene. But she's never coughing, or it's just sort of always there in the right place. Probably a lot of people have cancer as a result of this.
Between her and Bogey,
Yeah, and at some point we should also talk about the fashion, since I brought that up. But
we will swing back around to fashion for sure. Melissa.
Yes. So one thing that from the very beginning, I think way back when, and then something that still comes across, is even though today, if I watch it, I know the ending, I know what she's up to. It's like at first she's so convincing as a kind of a girl's girl. She's looking out for this fragile wife, even though she's doing what she's doing. We kind of feel like, she has no choice to do what she does at first. She's kind of helping the wife take his attention off of the wife and put it onto her. And she's kind of taking one for the team. And you really want her to protect the wife so much. But then, of course, as it goes, you see what she's really up to. And I just remember feeling so devastated because I wanted better. I wanted Nicole to protect her, but the ending's great, of course. But I love how sexy she is. I love how commanding she is. And, especially when I was going through this phase of watching these types of movies, she really stood out because she just, you were just saying, she's so powerful, and she can stand in a room full of men, and that is who you're going to take orders from. And I love that.
She's the only one who is a worthy foil to Michelle. Like,
Yes.
she, even though he knocks her around, she comes back. And she is, as you said, the only one who could protect Christina. She is the only one who could come up with this scheme and say, here's a way to help. Here's a way for us to get back at him. She's so commanding. All three of them, I mean, really is a triumvirate of performances, and they all hold the screen equally. It's really impressive.
Well, I would say, sort of to Melissa's point, her character, Nicole, is especially one to watch on rewatches of this movie. Just like I think Vertigo gets better the more you rewatch it. With this one, knowing what they were up to gives you so much more to look at in her performance. I mean, for one thing, she starts off with those sunglasses, which give her such a fierce look, and we hear that it's to cover up this black eye that Michelle gave her. But the multiple watching me is skeptical of that. Is that just a show? To make poor Christina think she's being beaten around.
Doug, I just have to say that I have never thought about that point before, about it might have been a ploy with the sunglasses, and that just makes it even better in my head to consider that.
Yeah, and I feel I kind of commiserate with Melissa in the point that you made, Melissa, about being sad that it wasn't the two women who were actually in on it in the end. And I felt too, because I'm watching it, I was like, for the 50s, this has to be one of the only movies I could think of where you would have had two women really helping each other in the context of infidelity. You might have had a movie where two women are helping each other, but not in this context where it's we're together and we're fighting this stuff that we can't do anything about because because society is certainly not going to help us in this situation. So we have to help ourselves. And I was like, it's so cool. That was really early, but then it really wasn't that.
Well, in the United States, this was still the last years of the production code, and that kind of relationship could not have been rewarded at the end of the movie like it is.
Yeah.
Well, I guess they do get caught, so maybe they're not
right.
Well, and I do want to kind of circle around to when you first watch this movie. There is an element of the supernatural in that we have a corpse that has disappeared and that we feel has revived itself and is acting out in a vengeful way, like a vengeful spirit, haunting them, literally haunting the halls, showing up in photographs. And there's something that's really kind of wonderful. That's one of the things I think about on your original view, is that I wasn't expecting it to be. I mean, we don't expect the plot twist because it does really just kind of come out of left field, but the fact that it does feel like it's a ghost story. It reminds me very much of kind of the Cat and the Canary, old dark house films, where we are following what we think is a ghost, we're following what we feel is a haunting, and then it's revealed that it's of the human, a human undertaking. But that's one of the things I really loved about this, is that because there's so much atmosphere, because there is such a great use of silence throughout, that we really are leaning forward and we're trying to look into the corners and see what's going to happen next. And when we also have the idea of her, she goes to see if it's her husband in the morgue. And that's when this detective enters the situation, and he's like, no, I'll find your husband. She's like, no, we're good.
Yeah.
Thanks, but no thanks.
There's that very last scene, right, that brings back in the supernatural interpretation, lets you have just a little bit as a treat of the supernatural interpretation. I personally, my headcanon is that the boy was telling the truth, and that she is haunting the place now, because I think, just hashtag justice for Christina, they did her dirty. And I think that that would be a modicum of justice that she could get if she could come back from beyond the grave and make these people's lives miserable. So yeah, I kind of want that for her. But it does feel very playful of Clouzot to just throw that in at the very last second and just say, oh, okay, well, maybe there is something ghostly, you know, sort of
Well,
hedging
and
his bets, but also just sort of like, you know, toying with us.
Well, and you can imagine the next movie where the ghost of Christina does haunt, because if anybody ever had reason to come back from beyond the grave and haunt somebody, it's Christina.
You know, and you said justice for Christina. I have to say justice for that little boy, because he spends the whole
Man.
movie, all of these adults are using him to their benefit, and he just gets in trouble every time, and he did nothing
And he's
almost
telling
wrong.
the truth the whole time, even when they're trying to
Yeah,
punish
it
him.
gets his toys taken
Even in the
away.
very end, they're like, okay, 6 hours, not enough. Go back to the corner. And I'm just like, oh, that poor kid.
It's interesting that you brought up the ghost story interpretation, because I thought about that a lot on this viewing of it, which I hadn't really done before. And I'm the type of a person who I don't really believe in ghosts. So whenever a film is about ghosts, it's all about atmosphere for me, and it's not about, I'm not actually scared, but I can be, you know, I can find it, I don't know, atmospheric and chilling in that way. But I don't go to bed and then have to turn the lights on to go to sleep or something like that. So the fact that this is all grounded in reality until that twist, the playful twist upon the twist, that's what makes it work so well, because it has the power. It has all of the illusion of the ghost story is shattered with concrete evidence, showing that it's people who did this to one another, creating that horror. And to me, that's what's really terrifying. And that's also a very French way of looking at things. I think everyone in France is essentially an atheist until the last like 5 minutes of their life, when they run back to the Catholic Church and have to be forgiven for their sins, just in case it turns out to be true. And I think that this film reeks of that kind of interpretation. It's like, here's this woman from the real life. Vera Clouzout is from Brazil. In the film, I don't know, do we actually mention where she's from?
Venezuela.
That's right. So, but anyway, the point is she's a foreigner in France, and she's got her little shrine with her altar, and she believes in this what the French would consider superstition, what the characters in the film consider superstition. And look where it gets her, right? Like, she ends up like getting scared to death because of that. So it's if it's a morality play, it's kind of a twist on it's certainly not a morality play that would have worked in North America in the 1950s. None of this would have passed, because she would have had a different lesson at the end. And also when the inspector does find out what's going on, it's interesting how he doesn't
Save her.
Just save her. He waits until she gets hers. Then he comes in and it's like he wanted to make sure they all got punished,
right?
So that he could close his book. I noticed that this time around, and I thought that was perhaps an indictment of the way that police handle their business in France, which is, you know, kind of rings true. So.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, that because I had the same feeling. I'm like, why doesn't he save Christina? And it's like, well, Christina did in fact plot to murder her husband.
That's right.
You know, like she is guilty of murder, at least the planning thereof, and what she thought was the execution. And so perhaps he does feel like that is justice, is that she must also meet her end. These two must meet their end, etc. But yes, absolutely. I was like going, just get in there. Come on, man.
Although he does promise her an acquittal in an earlier scene, even though he seems to be aware that her heart condition is making it hard for her to handle this. It's almost like he's kind of enjoying like coming with more information and keeping, like, sitting at her bedside, keeping her awake, like showing up at random.
Sneaking into her house. Yeah.
I hate to give spoilers to you guys, but the reason he didn't save her is because of the plot twist in the screenplay, and it wouldn't have played out right.
That's right. That's right.
Probably true.
Cullen, I want to throw the ball to you, because I think there's two other characters we haven't mentioned yet, and they are the swimming pool and the bathtub. Like, those two characters loom large throughout this film, especially the pool.
In my book, I have a 3-part framework. There's sort of 3 lenses that I'm looking at the pool through: a site of secrets, a site of sexuality, and a site of social segregation. All 3 of those are at play really in like most, times a pool shows up in a horror movie, but I include, I had to keep it organized somehow. And I included Diabolique in the site of sexuality section, mainly because of what I was talking about before, the queer element in the film. There's all of these classical sort of womanly associations with water in general, and kind of water as a feminine space. And the other thing, I drew a lot on Harry Benshoff's book, Monsters in the Closet, probably the classic text on queer themes in horror. And he talks about this monster queer seducer trope, who tends to be an older figure, a more experienced figure, who sort of brings the generally inexperienced protagonist into this alternative lifestyle. And of course, very often, hi Bishop, very often in horror films, like murder is kind of symbolic of transgressions, some sort of transgression of social norms. So I came up with this, I think I coined this term, the threesome murder, which is a very common thing in queer horror films. You see it in The Hunger with Susan Sarandon. You see it in Nightmare on Elm Street 2. You see it in Fright Night, where basically the older seducer sort of coaches the younger participant through their first murder. And they do it together. Halloween Kills has one as well, for a more recent example. And I think the popularity of that trope, other than Hitchcock's Rope, which I mentioned earlier, which the context is different there. I think that comes into play here. And of course, if you take that sort of, like I said, symbolic consummation of the queer relationship, add in the like womanly associations of water, then you basically have these 2 women who have been wronged by the same man, who are rejecting essentially like the importance of masculinity in their lives and their sort of subjugation to it, and submerging him in a symbol of feminine power. That's kind of, if it sounds too heady and like too much of a reach, I apologize, but the book's already going to print, so I can't change it now.
Any other thoughts on the swimming pool as a character?
I find that throughout the movie, whenever Christina looks out, I do too. Like you said, on a first viewing, when you lean forward, I kind of look for something to show up there, even though I know nothing's going to. But I think it's really successful in that. It's a mystery pool.
Yeah, it's so dirty and murky, and like this is kind of I think that the flavor of the film, like this is not a great place to send your kids, and yet it's clearly an upscale boarding school.
Chlorinated.
Yeah.
Well, I think the place was perhaps once upscale and is kind of falling into disrepair as they go into all these financial problems, which we see throughout the course of the film. The bad fish, the pool that's like not repaired, the walls in the space, like the texture of the wallpaper and things. Like I was noticing how throughout the whole film you see evidence of things kind of falling apart slowly. There's a bit of decay all around, and in addition to the swimming pool having that murky, almost frothy texture to it, that in black and white is so much more exciting than it would be in color, because we're not exactly sure what we're looking at. It looks very abstract, but it looks quite disturbing, that water, in a way that I don't think in color it would quite read that same way. But throughout the film, everything is very textural. It's a film that I think almost more than any other film I've seen really relies on its sound design in order to evoke that that texture. So whether it's like the sound of the basket going down the stairs, or the Citroën, the door slamming and kind of like half sticking, and or if it's the wheels of the when they're wheeling the coffin in the morgue, and it's going over the tiles and then going into the elevator with the door closing and the metal door closing. There's all these sounds that make you feel, and the texture of each situation, and make you live it. And and the pool being the most obvious example of it, but it's throughout the whole thing.
There's also sort of and this comes across much more in the remake. I think there's also a religious angle to the pool and the bathtub. The idea of a baptismal font, and I think in the remake at one point, the Christina character, who's named Mia in the remake, says something about holy water, and there's like some genuflection that happens, that sort of thing. Christina being a former nun, and nobody really buying her, like nobody really respecting her her like religious devotion in this like space that she is now. There's a symbolic rebirth that happens both with the drowning in the tub and with the putting of the body in the swimming pool. And of course there's a resurrection, because it turned out he wasn't dead, but from what from how it appears, he
Right.
he rose from the dead out of the pool. Mark, you were gonna say.
Yeah, I had two thoughts on it. One was the religious aspect. Definitely. I mean, I grew up in conservative Christianity, so I see those things everywhere. So he rose again from both bodies of water. And so in one sense, there is that kind of religious tie into, and it's why it works so well on Christina. It may be subconscious, but she's already fearful, and superstitious or whatever it is. But then like, oh my goodness, like he came back from the dead, and like she could believe this could be happening. But I also feel like maybe in a more symbolic way, don't know why I would say it was intentional by Clouzot, but speaking about some of the things Melissa brought up, that if you're thinking of this as the societal way that these women are like, they're trapped in these situations, even as a mistress, you're trapped into this society in the way that it looks at you and what it will allow you to do or not do to get out of those situations, that him rising again from those is just another way of saying, like, even in death, I'm coming back, and I'm asserting myself as the horrible masculine society or patriarchal society. I'm going to win anyway, even when you kill me.
Just when you've knocked the patriarchy down, it gets back up again.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hi, 2025. Good to see you.
Exactly.
I have, at the same time, I noticed that the boys' school, it seems like the women, they're controlling the lives of the boys as best they can, and the men are kind of just there, like, checking boxes, but the women are the ones who are really taking care of these kids,
doing the work,
and all of their direction, giving them lessons. But the headmaster punishes kids, but he doesn't seem to really have their attention, other than just like he's someone who's going to punish them, and they just kind of run from it. The women are the ones who seem to really be the ones they look at for direction, for information. And it seems like they're just kind of plagued with like these little monsters, or like all of them are these terrible little monsters who are going to grow up to be just as bad as this abusive man who they're trying to get rid of. And that's kind of like there in the background the whole time as they're dealing with this one man. And then they have all these other men who are gonna become someone they have to get rid of in the pool eventually, as their lessons apparently fail.
Yeah, and I think the school is in such disarray because Michelle won't spend Christina's money on the school and the boys, and Christina is very unhappy. Like, you're not spending the money that's my money to take care of these boys. Like I'm a teacher. I want you to take care of these kids. And you're, giving them rotten fish, and the school is falling apart. The pool doesn't work. And then at the end, you see even more why he was doing it. But he just wants all of the money.
I think with the pool too, I think that was the first time that you kind of get a glimpse that Nicole might not be what we think that she is, because she's willing to allow a boy, an impressionable young boy, into that nasty pool to find a body, which of course we know that she knows it wasn't there, but she's willing to put that out there that he can get into the pool and find a body. And of course, Christina's like, taken aback, like, why would we do this? But
But he's a
he's
champion skin
undressing.
diver.
Exactly. And he's getting down to his skivvies and getting in that nasty pool to look for a body. Little does he know. And so that's the first time I remember thinking, wow, that's dark. Like, I know she just killed someone, but that's dark. So
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because while I was watching it on this I'm like, he's going to find the body, and it's like, he's not going to find the body. The body's not there. But yeah, we do get just kind of really drawn in. I think one of the other comparisons that we can make with Hitchcock is that there are a lot of little logistical inconsistencies throughout that, if you think about it too long, you're like, how could that ever happen? But Hitchcock was famous for that. He's like, I'd much rather serve them cake than reality, and if they happen to have that icebox moment, at 3 a.m. where they're like, hey, wait a minute, how could he possibly get out of the pool without them knowing? How could he stay in the water that long? How could he get into the tub? And all of these things were just like, this doesn't make any sense at all. But you don't care because the story is so well told.
To quote Hitchcock, a critic who talks to me about plausibility is a dull fellow.
Truth.
That did remind me, while we mentioned Hitchcock again, there was just a really funny anecdote that I read about, that Hitchcock received an angry letter from a dad because his daughter, after seeing Diabolique, would refuse to take baths, and then saw Psycho and refused to take showers. And he wrote back him a letter that basically just said, send her to the dry cleaners.
There's a lot of humor throughout this. That's the other thing, is that I forget, you think about the suspense, you think about the terror, but you don't necessarily remember those wonderful punctuations of humor throughout. The first one that comes to mind was Nicole's neighbors, or her sublet upstairs. Those scenes are hilarious, and in one way you think that it's going to pay off in that the whole noting of the time, like when the draining of the tub happens, you think that's going to come back as some kind of evidence, but it never really pays off. But you don't care. Like, it's such an enjoyable vignette.
Yeah, that upstairs neighbor is the Frenchiest French guy who ever Frenched. Maybe Don, maybe you have I haven't lived in France, but he certainly seemed very archetypal.
Yeah, for sure. And then especially how he's so critical of them, and he's pounding on the floor, like, stop draining the tub. And, it's like these baths at midnight, it's the fall of Rome. And, and then the minute he sees them outside of the apartment, he's like, oh, let me help you with the basket. And it's like, wait a minute, this guy, and he's trying to,
he just wants them to leave.
Yeah, and he's also trying to be like, I'm the man helping the ladies out. He's kind of like, I'm the good guy.
And the wife rolling her eyes the whole time.
All those little false leads that don't pay off, they really get you each time, even when you know what's coming, and you kind of follow those little threads. Like, for example, the soldier that shows up at the gas station, and he goes in the back, and he's drunk, and he's like, and then we see the water coming out of the basket, and it's like, oh, they're going to be found out. Someone's going to tell them about, and you get so swept up in those little vignettes that are scattered throughout the film that, like, you forget to even look for it later, but you're in the moment, you're like the women trying to get rid of the body, going, well, are they gonna, is this gonna be it? Is this how we're gonna be found out?
Yeah, and I think that is also, it's fairly real to life. I think people will ask, like, how did they get away with it? It was like so bumbling and stupid. But I was like, because no one else is thinking that two people next to them are committing a murder.
Right.
Like, that's not what I'm going to think if I see a trunk leaking in the back of someone's car. You're just going to think, oh, you must have something juicy in there, and now it's leaking. I better tell you. But so all these things come up. But like most people, other than in hindsight, are not going to be like, oh, that's what's going on here. But as the audience, you're like, oh no.
I think that's why the neighbors are so useful in the killing scene, because if that guy thinks the worst thing happening is them making noise during his radio show, he's really wrong. We know that, but he doesn't know that, and that's both funny and creepy at the same time.
One of the things that is the most funny to me in this film is Simone Signoret's reaction to people, and it definitely plays better if you speak French. But every time somebody mentions that Michelle, the headmaster, is missing or something, she'll immediately say something like, "Oh, ça alors," which means like, yeah, that's a good one. Or it's kind of hard to translate because it's just a simple ça alors means like, oh yeah, you said it. And it's just such a, she says it in such a like kind of gravelly way, like, and no one says like, what do you mean or anything, because they just like let it go. And she's always like punctuating those clues that other people identify with her own like admission of how, yeah, we know he's gone. And nobody catches on. But that's what's so funny is how they just don't notice it and how she just is so blunt about it.
Well, I think that, Michelle, he's a really scary guy. Like I remember feeling very unsafe watching it because I didn't know what he was going to do on camera. I didn't know if he was going to slap one of the women. I didn't know if he was going to slap one of the children. I didn't know what was going to happen. And I remember feeling very uneasy every time he kind of loses his cool, that anxiety. I would tighten up a little bit. And I still do, I think, on repeats a little bit, even though I know, there's not going to be any on-screen violence from him. I just kind of still have that. But I also think that, the other characters are kind of designed to, they're not going to believe that a woman is going to take this strong, opinionated man out. I mean, he's known for just being this, just very healthy, strong man. And these women aren't going to take him out. And so to me, that's kind of how it comes across. Like they could pretty much say, we killed him. And I think those guys would say, oh, okay, and just kind of laugh it off because they're not going to kill the great Michelle because they looked up to him so much.
Well, and they feared him,
They
like,
did. Yes.
like the idea that these two women could stand up to him when they can't. I mean, they are men and, they can't even stand up to him. What you just mentioned earlier, Don, the idea of the little moments throughout, I think that's one of the things that I was really taken with this last viewing was the idea that you have those little pieces that keep paying off. The rotten fish, the image in the photograph, the gatekeeper who knows the signal. There's so many great little details throughout this film, and they keep on repeat viewings. They keep kind of being accentuated each time, and that's one of the things that I really loved about. We talked about how it inspired Alfred Hitchcock, but it also inspired William Castle, who was another great rival of Hitchcock because, according to his biography, he saw the line around the block for Les Diaboliques, and he said people really love being scared, and so that's what he decided he was going to do with his career, and proceeded to make things like The Tingler and House on Haunted Hill, and just became a great showman. In the same way that we have that don't reveal the ending to your friend, like that's a bit of ballyhoo. And that is the kind of thing that Castle also touched on, was like, you know what, give them a show, give them something that they're going to remember and feel like they have a secret now that they are going to keep, and anybody else is going to have to experience it firsthand. Like that was the whole idea. This film continues to reverberate. And as somebody else mentioned, like there's not a lot of explicit gore, or there's one quote murder throughout the whole thing, and yet we are on the edge of our seat throughout.
Yeah, and like those little details, like you said, we were talking about the details that pay off and the ones that don't, that are just kind of red herrings. Like a good mystery, you don't know as you're watching which details will be important later
There
and
you
which
go.
won't. So it creates this intense kind of scrutiny that you're expected to give to every frame, and like someone said earlier, that you're leaning in and just like super engaged, because it doesn't hold your hand. I think the absence of music that I think Mark pointed out earlier is another, it's that European thing, in American movies, music tells you how to feel. In European movies, music tells you that, the movie's over, essentially.
H.G. Clouzot was apparently not the nicest guy to work with. He was rather tyrannical. He drove his actors a little crazy. Clouzot was not necessarily a nice guy. And also his brother co-wrote the script with him using the screen name of Jérôme Géronimi. That was because Clouzot didn't want there to be another Clouzot. He wanted to be the only one that you saw on the screen other than his wife.
That trio in the movie was mirrored in the making of the film, that she just despised him by the end. And she was like, I was contracted for 8 weeks and he only paid me for those 8 weeks. And it was like hell doing it. And same thing in that supposedly the rotten fish really was rotten. Right. That he actually made the cast and the boys eat food that was not good. And even her, when she had to swallow it, like that reaction was pretty genuine because it was not good food. And that, he was not, it was kind of like the triangle in the film was there in the making of the film.
Making a movie is so hard, and there's who knows what the real story is, and who knows how much exaggeration went into talking about Clouzot, and how much of that helps the myth of the film and adds to its mystique, especially with his wife dying about 5 years afterwards of a heart condition.
You hear the stories of Hitchcock, and his kind of disregard for actors, at least certain actors. And I feel like this is they are similar in that way, in that these actors are there to tell my story. It is less about their creative artistry as it is about executing my vision. And I think we see that in both Hitchcock and in Clouzot. And I mean, we haven't really talked about the cinematography, but I think that use of black and white is really well used here, in that it does provide that atmosphere. Don's comment earlier about the pitch blackness of that swimming pool, like you literally cannot see below the surface, and you're not even quite sure what that substance might be. So there's an artistry in the same way that Hitchcock had his meticulousness. And I don't know what Clouzot's working process was. I don't know if he storyboarded everything out ahead of time, but I think he did.
Well, there were some very specific shots that used like mirrors so well. We'd see a face back there in the middle of a black hallway, a perfect shaft of light to catch something. So I think there was a lot of forethought with that.
Circling back around, final thoughts on Diabolique, Henri Clouzot, and anything else we want to chat about. Mark, I'm going to pitch things down to you.
I just say again, I had not seen it for a long time, and it was good to revisit. And I could definitely still see this being a film that someone who's just interested in film is going to see it and be inspired to write a script or to make a movie, because of the way it can affect you as the spectator of the film, and how it plays with you in a good way, or where you could feel I got tricked, but I really liked it. And it's like a prime example of that. So, I think it's gonna, it'll still continue down there, even though Clouzot is not a household name. I think this film will certainly last.
Don.
Well, a couple of points. One is the fashion that I wanted to mention. So Cravant, I don't know how to say her name. Her last name was it looks like Craven in English, but I don't know if in French they pronounced it Cravant or, anyway, she was a designer, and she's not credited in the film, but apparently she was the first French designer to come up with the push-up bra. She was one of the first pret-a-porter designers, started out about 10 years before this. And, Signoret's wardrobe, especially, she's looking so businesslike and yet chic and yet sexy. All these things that, the combination of those things, I don't know, before 1955 or 54, if we can think of so many examples of that, even in France. It's kind of like this this moment of power in women's fashion, and that has kind of, and also the way Signoret's hair is cut, with this kind of short haircut that seems almost boyish in a way, and yet is still glamorous and feminine. And this helps her character and her persona on the screen. That was one thing I wanted to mention. And then the other thing was when we were talking about like little details that were there, the false leads. When we go to the morgue and we see the body, it turns out not to be the body, and it's a dead end. But yet we still have the scene of the body coming down the hallway through the elevator, and in a wooden box, and we never see the body except just the face for a second. But we hear the box kind of rattling on the cart, and all of that makes you think about the corpse, makes you think about a body, makes you think about the murder and what they've done, whether it's this body or another body, or as it turns out that they haven't murdered him at all. But it's those little the little details that are false ends are actually, they're not fluff, because they all contribute something else to the understanding of the characters and the scenario that makes the whole situation more terrifying. Because there's a lot of other films where there are like little things that don't pay off, and then you notice, but why did they do the thing? And, in this case, none of these things are unsatisfying by the end of the film. None of them are things that you needed to have resolved, and instead they leave you with this sense of unease and fear in some cases. So it's a very masterfully structured film.
Cullen.
I will be the crass, ugly American and put in a plug for the remake by the director of National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation and Benny and June. Yep. Weird filmography, to say the least.
Is it Jeremiah Chechik?
That is Jeremiah Chechik,
okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Starring Sharon Stone and Isabella Adjani, and Kathy Bates, who absolutely steals the show. They had a gender flip on the detective character.
We won't spoil anything since Melissa's here, but
I think that it is worthwhile. It does interesting stuff with the source material. It is certainly not a masterpiece on the order of Clouzot's, but it's a really fun thriller. And I think the pool's great in it, and it interrogates some things about the original that I think were worthy of interrogation.
Cool. I'll just throw it back to you because it feels like a big Hollywood remake of this 1955 film. Sharon Stone, like, she is what feels like a caricature of the Nicole character. Mm-hmm. And Chaz Palminteri feels like a bigger version of Michelle. Like, it just feels like everything is kind of like blown up bigger.
Louder. Yeah.
Yeah. This feels subtler and quieter. There's a real Hollywood feel to the 96 version, because I remember seeing it and thinking, absolutely, of course you're going to cast Sharon Stone because she's already played a bisexual killer in Basic Instinct. And Isabella Adjani is going to play that sad character. And Chaz Palminteri is that big scary guy. And Kathy Bates is that grounded, wisecracking. You're like, okay, yep, you're just checking all the boxes here. I agree, it's entertaining, but it feels like the supercharged version of this.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's the Hollywood. It's the make it louder, make it longer, and just make everything bigger version.
And there is a twist on a twist on a twist. So it has its rewards in that regard.
Yeah.
Doug.
I would say I don't think of Les Diaboliques exclusively as a horror film, even though the last 10 minutes absolutely do. But I think you make a really great point, Aaron, about during so much of the movie, we are wondering, can the dead come back to life, or has that happened? And I think that alone, keeping that in our conscious through the movie, is enough to help make it really a great horror film.
Great. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. Yeah, because this is one of those, like I said, there's almost a murder in this movie. And then there is a murder at the very end, but in terms of what we come to think of as a horror film, this may not necessarily in the final analysis, but I think it feels like a horror film right up until then. Melissa.
I like the word that Don used where he said it's satisfying. And I think that pretty much everything in this film is very satisfying. I think that's a great word for this. And, of course, the twist is wonderful. The playful ending, I love it. The strong women woman, Nicole, and all the performances, but I think it's a really great film and kind of a reminder of everything that it's inspired since then. I mean, I can think of so many films that has taken this ending and, twisted it just enough so you don't immediately think about it, but that's exactly where they got it from. And I think today maybe it doesn't get as much credit as it should for everything it's done. And so it's a good, revisit, and I'm glad I get to come on the show and talk about it with all of you. You had some really interesting perspectives that I had never thought about, and now I just want to rewatch it again, even though I did last week. I want to go back and rewatch it again with all of this in my mind. So, and I hope other people do too.
I mean, that was why it ended up in Horror 101, the book. It does feel like an important film, and it is at a really kind of an interesting point in the horror genre in 55, because sci-fi is king at this time, and we are starting to see, like what can we do with the old dark house premise? And Clouzot shows us that there's still some life in that old chestnut still. Thank you all so much. This is a great conversation. And like you, Melissa, I love hearing these perspectives, because that's one of the reasons the Horror 101 book and Hidden Horror is all comprised of different voices, not just mine. And I love hearing other people's thoughts. So thank you all so much, and looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.